Good morning. This is Friday, July the 27th. This is Ron. Welcome to Storytime. Thank you. And like I said, welcome to Storytime. This is Ron, the only true conservative in the United States of America, because I make the presumption for the status quo. Speaking to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers in the audience. So, one of the things that I was thinking about earlier this morning was the idea of dealing with people and dealing with them. A lot of times, the left, when they want to um, deal with you, they're going to deal with you in a rather competitive or antagonistic kind of way. They're going to approach you and try to conduct an interrogation, or they're going to conduct some sort of a cross examination, and but there's going to be a lot of game theory involved, and there's going to be a lot of um, very winning losing kind of situations. And in the past, I've said one of the ways to deal with that, or perhaps the right way to deal with that, is to change it from a power struggle into an issue of right and wrong, and to intellectualize the conversation. Also, what you can do and needs to be done is to negotiate. Negotiations shows respect for the individual, the other person, and is also again intellectually oriented. So you would negotiate things such as the terms of the conversation. So if they're going to ask you, what about the poor, for instance, you could say, okay, well, let's assume that let us both agree. That's a better way to put it. Let us both agree that the poor are people who make less than $20,000 a year for a family of four, or so that in that way you're trying to take the emotion out of the equation. Also, by asking questions, you can also negotiate asking and personalizing it. One of the tricks of the left is to um, act as though they represent people they really don't, or not authorized to represent. It's called leadership. Ayn Rand referred to it in a kind of awkward way. She called it representation without authorization, so otherwise known as leadership. And what you can do is challenge that leadership. Somebody says, "What about the poor?" Well, who are you talking about? Uh, are you poor? How long have you been poor? And if they're no, the poor in the United States of America. Hey, you're not authorized. You don't represent these people. You're not authorized to speak on their behalf. Or another good one is you're not a leader. You're not a change agent. So, and go at it from that particular standpoint. Now, you're going to could potentially get involved in a negotiation with the other person anytime you're going to challenge what it is that their notions. Listen to what it is they have to say. Listen carefully to it, and if they're leaving things open to interpretation, get those things nailed down. Get the definitions nailed down, and be very clear about what the conversation is going to be about, or else you're going to find yourself in a very awkward position. You're going to find yourself being made to look like a bad guy. That's one of the typical tactics. Is basically the left says, "Do what we want you to do, think the way we want you to do, or we're going to make you look bad. We're going to shame you in front of your neighbors, and shame you in public in general." So uh, you want to get out of that situation, not let yourself be put in a position where you're being manipulated, bullied, or intimidated, and have the conversation, have the debate on an intellectual basis, on a right and wrong basis. The other thing, of course, that you can always do is if somebody wants to talk to you, is you can say, I'm busy right at the moment. Can we talk later? It's another good negotiation strategy. Shows respect for the other individual. There's nothing hostile about it. There's nothing wrong with it. And So I think that's an excellent one. Don't assume that because somebody starts talking to you that you have to participate. A lot of times we do things either out of convenience, because it seems more convenient just to go along than it does to say, "Excuse me, but I'm busy right at the moment. Can we talk about this later?" Or because of either because of convenience or curiosity, which is you can get yourself in a lot of trouble by simply giving into your curiosity. Somebody comes up and says, "Can I talk to you for a second?" And you're thinking, "Well, maybe this person's got money for me. Maybe this person's got puppies." And then it turns out that they're a salesman and they're selling something that you're not interested in and you'll never be interested in. And so, of course, you're disappointed and crushed. But you could have avoided it by simply saying, you're doing something. Let's say I'm picturing myself at a coffee shop having a cup of coffee and maybe reading a newspaper. And so they come up, "Can I talk to you for a second?" "Well, excuse me, but I'm kind of busy right at the moment. Can we talk later?" Okay, that's a good one. Another one is to simply say, "Hey, you know what? Hold that thought. I'll be right back," and get up and walk away, and don't come back. Leave them sitting there or standing there, as the case may be. Depending on, a lot of it depends on how rude they are too. If they come up, walk up while you're sitting having a cup of coffee, and they're fairly polite about it, it's one thing. If they just come in and sit down and expect you to have a conversation with them, then again, it might be a little bit using the tactic of something a little bit more blunt, I suppose, like "Hold on for a second, I'll be right back," might be in order. So those are a few ideas, but remember that the left is always going to use the psychologistic tools and techniques. They don't want to get into debates. What they want to do is shame you and manipulate you psychologically into either shutting up or going along with the program. If you can frustrate those people in your life, and if they are continually frustrated each and every day, everywhere they go to try to spread their socialist theme, they are frustrated, met with people that know what they're doing and know how to shut them down. Sooner or later, they're going to give it up. Okay, because they're in this because they've been promised power. How many times have you heard various Democrats say, "We will empower you"? This is what they mean, that they're going to show you the tools and the techniques to use on non-socialists to, again, force them to do what you want to do. So don't allow them to psychologize you. You demoralize them, and eventually they're going to have to give up being a socialist. And once it dries up at the grassroots level, there's not going to be any call for any types of socialist legislation, et cetera, et cetera. So when I come back, it's going to be reading. I'm going to be reading from Introducing Marxism and a little bit on dialectical materialism. Thank you very much. And Introducing Marxism. It's an icon totem book. I highly recommend that people start getting and reading books that are foundational and not being stuck on books that are about current events. Because current events books are good for about until that whatever that subject is, current event subject is until it's expired. If it's a book about 9/11, well, the whole 9/11 situation is kind of gone now. Osama bin Laden has been killed, and so the book's really of little value other than historically. So a lot of current events books are going to be flash in the pans. It's something that's very hot today, but in 2 or 3 months, it's going to be of little or no value to you. Look for the books that are foundational, books that are on philosophy. I also recommend the Trivium, which is a book that deals with grammar, not specific grammar, but general grammar and rhetoric and logic, how all of those three come together to keep you informed, make arguments. There's a lot of tools and techniques that the left uses that involve errors in grammar, errors in rhetoric, and also logic. So, if you can have at least a working knowledge of those subjects, then you can defeat a liberal each and every time, day after day, with your eyes closed. So, but anyways, Icon Totem books are the introducing series, introducing Marxism, introducing philosophy, introducing ethics, introducing postmodernism, and they're fascinating because it reveals things about our culture and cultural dynamics that we didn't know before. So, in this particular case, it's introducing Marxism, and even though today there is really what we're involved in is not Marxism, the left isn't Marxist anymore, it's post Marxist, also known as the New Left. So, but this is dialectical materialism and Marx's theory on that. Materialism alone was not enough for Marx. Enlightenment empiricism had led to a materialistic view of the world as a machine operating according to invariable laws. The solution lay in dialectical materialism. Using this, the contradictions inherent in all aspects of the world at any one time made the transformation into something else inevitable. Their job was to chart their revolutionary inevitability. The three stages. Dialectical materialism provided all that Marx needed as a basis for revolutionary theory. It was scientific, it insisted on change, and it could be used to chart a direction from which revolutionary activists could learn. Along with this went a conception of change in human nature, or species nature as Marx called it, that involved three stages, or moments. To begin with, humans are entirely consumed by their species life. At this point, humans are free in the fullest socialist sense because they are able to control their own destiny. They are no longer determined by their natural environment and the antagonisms instigated by necessity. Let's see. There we go. The productive forces. The basic human relations are dictated by the necessity to produce and exchange goods that can satisfy the wide range of our needs. Human labor, their acquired practical skills and implements or machines made to help them extract and transform the raw materials. These Marx called the productive forces, but these are not enough. Humans must also work together to be effective. There must be relationships between them. These Marx calls the productive relations. In early human history, Marx believed people work together in a cooperative, primitive communism. Class antagonism. So the productive relations themselves instill hostility between two fundamental antagonistic classes, the exploiters and the exploited. Marx begins with the Communist Manifesto with that idea. The history of all hitherto existing societies is the history of the class struggle. Substructure and superstructure. The foundation of any society consists of the basic productive forces and relations. Marx called this the substructure or infrastructure fundamental to materialistic social reality. There's always a superstructure of laws, customs, religions, government, and other cultural institutions whose independence is entirely an illusion. Culture's sole ideological function is to protect the interests of the class that owns the forces of production. Transitions from one kind of society to another happen when some kind of major technological change in the forces of production simply does not fit with the existing relations of production. Rapid changes in the way that goods are produced introduce sudden, violent, and qualitative changes to the ways that humans relate to each other. So, I liked that part about superstructure and substructure because it deals again with culture and the desire of the left to affect and change and subvert culture within whatever society they happen to find themselves. And that's again the important part when we're dealing with here, politics in the United States. It is that those changes in culture that are going to breed changes in politics and political behavior, not the other way around. And so Marx understood that if he wants to change, if you want to change a society, you do it by changing their culture. This was also echoed by a and I recorded this or had a clip a few segments ago in which a lady from as a journalist, female journalist from Venezuela, was being interviewed about how did it happen? How did Venezuela go from being one of the best economies in South America to the socialist basket case that it is today? And she said many times that the left subverted Venezuelan culture and changing what it is that people expect from life. So you have that here in the United States. It used to be that people worked, and they worked. It wasn't just for a paycheck. That's what the left will have you believe, that everything is about having a paycheck and how much money. It was deeper than that. It was there was a religious aspect to it. Idle hands or the devil's workshop, and the idea that also that you took nothing for free. That decades ago, Americans didn't do that. If you wanted to offer somebody something for nothing, the answer was no. No, thank you. You always wanted to earn whatever it is that you got. That changed in our society, and it changed culturally with the attitudes of kind of a why not? The idea that you'd be crazy not to accept something for nothing. If you get the opportunity to get something for free, you'd be crazy not to take it. And you get those cultural cues from television, the movies, etc. And so, along with that, then comes a change because decades and decades ago, you don't have welfare, you don't have food stamps, you don't have a lot of the quote unquote social safety nets that we have today because of American cultural attitudes. I don't want to be. It would be considered deeply embarrassing to have to go and support myself by going to the political parties and asking for what amounts to a handout. I want to earn my way. I want to work, and it's also important to me to again keep myself busy from a Christian perspective. That if I'm productive, I'm also being a good, not only a good citizen, but a good Christian as well. But a lot of that has gone by the wayside. And a lot of that is because of also religion in general, but specifically Christianity, has been denigrated in this country by the left. The left has come out and done it by pointing out certain inconsistencies within Christians, individual Christians themselves, say Jimmy Swaggart, and the Christian doctrine, where Christians are supposed to be loving people, nurturing people, and yet you have examples from the Catholic Church in which nuns or priests decades ago treated people rather harshly, and but that also and again that's another problem for the right, because the conservatives didn't come out and explain. Well, sure, it seems harsh, but that's because the church at the time believed that all that mattered and their only job was saving your soul, your almighty soul, and what you're doing here on earth, what your conditions are here on earth, are less relevant than what is going to happen to your immortal soul. And it was their mission to make sure that you don't end up spending all of eternity in hell. So that kind of fell to the wayside. But anyways, religion was denigrated successfully. It was subverted. It was made to look bad, and primarily because conservatives had no answer for a lot of the criticisms that came from the left. And so a lot of people turned their back on religion and religious cultural influences like idle hands or the devil's workshop. And so they then look at and say, why not? Why not get something for nothing? We've been, then in the past, we've worked hard, but we've done so because we've been cheated in a way, in a manner that we've been cheated. So that's why it's important to make a stand for cultural influences, so to speak, for the cultural status quo, let's put it that way, so that we don't end up becoming, and I don't see that the United States will become Venezuela, but end up becoming France or Italy or Spain or England, where we become if not a completely socialist society, then um, leaning that direction. And as a side note, I do want to say that I don't believe that Venezuela is not socialist, by the way. They have people that call themselves socialists running the government, but it's not socialist. And for two reasons. Number one, socialism can only take place worldwide. There is no such thing as a national socialism, or yeah, if you have socialism just within the boundaries of a particular country, that would be National Socialism or Nazism. But also because everybody in the world is stuck with the economy that we have now, which is called Keynesianism, and it's from a British economist called John Maynard Keynes. Okay, because the whole world has to operate on the same economic system. You can't have some people on the gold standard, some people that are going to go, some countries are going to use Keynes as the model, and then other countries that are going to go socialist. Doesn't work because we all have to trade amongst each other. So we have to have one system worldwide. And the world is using right now the Keynes model. Paper economy, where governments are heavily involved in the economies and are trying to create a situation where there's ever increasing prosperity. If there's threats of a recession looming, then the government steps in and inflates the money supply. When that threat of a bad economy dissipates, then the government tightens up money, doesn't allow for cuts back in terms of growth in the economy by not lending money and putting a check on inflation. And right, yeah, I'm putting a check on inflation. But anyways, the point is that the government gets involved in the economy, and so we all play by those rules. You can't have a situation where one country says, like Venezuela, says, "Well, you know what? I'm not going to play by those rules anymore. Where I'm going to do my own thing," and then expect to be able to trade with other countries. Venezuela is an oil-rich nation, but in order for her to exploit though that natural resources, she must be able to sell it to companies and countries around the world. And if she's going to be doing her own thing economically, she's going to find it difficult or impossible to do that. So when I come back, let's see what we're looking at here. Oh, let's see. This was Marxism, and then I'm going to have. We're going to be doing. Let me see here. Let's get this one out of here. That's the Marxism. Oh, yes, The Black Book of the American Left by David Horowitz. All right, thank you very much. And Black Murder Incorporated is the chapter that I was reading last week, and I stopped pretty much in the middle of it because it's a long chapter. And basically, David Horowitz this is the crucial point in his life ideologically, where he's about to go from being a lefty to being a conservative, because what is happening and about to happen, because he's been helping and assisting the Black Panther Party and in Oakland, California. And so there is about to be a murder that's going to take place, and that's what's going to go ahead and change shake him up and change his viewpoints for good. So let's see. Betty did not attend the funeral, and if she had, would not have been able to see what I saw. Moreover, she and I had never had the kind of relationship that inspired confidences between us. As my employee, she never really approved of the way Peter and I ran Ramparts. For whatever reasons, perhaps a streak of feminist militancy, she didn't trust me. Just as a precaution, I had warned Betty even before Deacon's funeral not to get involved in any part of the party or its functioning that she didn't feel comfortable with. But Betty kept her own counsel. In one of our few phone conversations, I mentioned the shooting at the dance. She did not take my remark further. Later, it became obvious that I hadn't really known Betty. I had counted to some extent on her middle class scruples to keep her from any danger zones she encountered in Panther territory. But this, too, was an illusion. She had passions that prompted her to want a deeper involvement in what she also perceived as their struggle against oppression. There was another reason I did not express my growing fears to Betty. The more fear I had, the more I realized that it would not be okay for me to voice such criticism, having been so close to the operation. To badmouth the party would be tantamount to treason. I had a wife and 4 children who lived in neighboring Berkeley, and I would not be able to protect them or myself from Elaine's wrath. There were other considerations in my silence, too. What I'd seen at the funeral, what I knew from hearsay and from the press were only blips on a radar screen that was highly personal, dependent on my own experience to read. I had to begin to know the Panther reality, at least enough to have a healthy fear of Elaine. But how could I convey this knowledge to someone who had not been privy to the same things I had? How could I do it in such a way that they would believe me and not endanger me? Before fleeing, my Panther friends had tried to warn me about Huey through similar signs, and I had failed to understand. My ignorance was dangerous to them and to myself. Finally, only the police had ever accused the Panthers of actual crimes. Everyone I knew and respected on the left and beyond the left regarded the police allegations against the Panthers as malicious libels by a racist power structure bent on holding down and eliminating militant black leadership. It was one of the most powerful liberal myths of the times. One Friday night, a month or so after Deacon's funeral, a black man walked into the Berkeley Square, a neighborhood bar that Betty frequented, and handed her a note. Betty, who seemed to know the messenger, read the note and left shortly afterwards. She was never seen alive again. On the following Monday, I received an anxious phone call from Tammy Van Patter, Betty's 18-year-old daughter, who had also worked for me at Ramparts. She told me her mother was missing and asked for my help. I phoned Elaine, but got Joan Kelly instead. Joan told me that Elaine had had a fight with Betty on Thursday and fired her. Later, Elaine lied to investigating police, telling them that she had fired Betty the previous Friday and hadn't seen her for a week before she disappeared. When Elaine returned my call, she immediately launched into a tirade against Betty, calling her an idiot who believed in astrology and who wanted to know too much. She said that Betty was employed by a bookkeeping firm with offices in the Philippines and was probably working for the CIA. Then Elaine turned on me for recommending that Betty be hired in the first place. She noted that I was bawling at Deacon's funeral and had not come around for a long time. Perhaps I was scared by the dangers the party faced, she suggested. Then she asked why I was so concerned about this white woman who was crazy when all those brothers had been gunned down by the police. White people didn't seem to care much when it was black people dying. I didn't answer her back. A week later, when Betty still had not turned up, I called Elaine one more time and was subjected to another torrent of abuse, culminating in a threat only thinly veiled. If you were run over by a car or something, David, I would be very upset because people would say I did it. I was visited in my home by the Berkeley police. They told me they were convinced that the Panthers had taken Betty hostage and had probably already killed her. From her daughter, Tammy, I learned that the very small circle of Betty's friends and acquaintances had all been questioned since her disappearance, and none had seen her for some time. She had left her credit cards and birth control pills at home, and thus could not have been going on an unexpected trip when she left the Berkeley Square with the mysterious messenger, just to the rendezvous to which she had been summoned. Betty was found on January 13, 1975, 5 weeks after she had disappeared, when her waterlogged body washed up on the western shore of San Francisco Bay. Her head had been bashed in by a blunt instrument, and police estimated that she had been in the water for 17 days. She was 42 years old. By this time, everything I knew about Betty's disappearance led to the conclusion that the Panthers had killed her. Everything I knew about the party and the way it worked led me to believe that Elaine Brown had given the order to have her killed. Betty's murder shattered my life and changed it forever. But even as I sank into a long period of depression and remorse, Elaine's star began to rise in Oakland's political firmament. A white woman who worked for the Black Panther Party had been murdered, But despite our rhetoric about police conspiracies and racist oppression, there seemed to be no consequences for Elaine or her party. The press made nothing of it. When Peter Collier approached Marilyn Baker, a Pulitzer Prize winning reporter for Channel 5 with the story, she said she wouldn't touch it unless a black reporter did it first. No black reporter did. Betty's friends in the Bay Area progressive community, who generally were alert to every injustice, even in lands so remote they could not locate them on the map, kept their silence about this one in their own backyard. Peter also went to the police, who told him, "You guys have been cutting our balls off for the last 10 years. You destroy the police and then you expect them to solve the murders of your friends." While the investigation of Betty's death continued, Elaine ran for the Oakland City Council and garnered 44% of the vote. The following year, under her leadership, the party provided the political machine that elected Oakland's first black mayor, Lionel Wilson. Elaine herself secured the endorsement of Governor Jerry Brown and was a Jerry Brown delegate to the Democratic Convention in 1976. Before making his run, Brown phoned Elaine to find out what kind of support the party could provide him. Tony Klein, a Panther lawyer and confidant of Elaine, was also a college roommate of the governor and became a member of his cabinet. Using her leverage in Sacramento, Elaine was able to get approval for an extension of the Grove-Shafter Freeway, which had been blocked by environmentalists. On the basis of this achievement, she began negotiations with the head of Oakland's Council for Economic Development to control 10,000 new city jobs that the freeway would create. In all these successes, the Learning Center was her showpiece. Capitalizing on liberal concerns for Oakland's inner-city poor, she obtained contributions and grants for the school and bought herself a red Mercedes. The party's political influence climbed to its zenith. It was an all-American nightmare. While Elaine's power grew to alarming proportions, I intensified my private investigations into the Panther reality that had previously eluded me. I had to confront my blindness and understand the events that had led to such an irreversible crossroads in my life and ended Betty's. I interrogated everyone I could trust who had been around the Panthers about the dark side of their operations, seeking answers to the questions of Betty's death. I discovered the existence of the Panther Squad, an enforcer group that Huey had organized inside the party to maintain discipline and carry out criminal activities in the East Oakland community. I learned of beatings, arson, extortion, and murders. The Learning Center itself had been used as the pretext for a shakedown operation of after-hours clubs, which were required to donate weekly sums and whose owners were gunned down when they refused. I learned about the personalities in the squad and about their involvement in Betty's murder. One of them, Robert Hurd, also known as Big Bob, because he was 6'8" and weighed 400 pounds. Big Bob told friends whom I talked to that the squad had killed Betty and more than a dozen other people in the brief period between 1972 and 1976. The other victims were all black and included the vice president of the Black Student Union at Grove Street College, whose misfortune was to have inadvertently insulted a member of the squad. Betty's children commissioned Hal Lipset, a private eye with connections to the left and to the Panthers themselves, who had employed him during Huey's trials, to investigate the case. Lipset confirmed the police conclusion that the Panthers had killed Betty. They also tried to get the case against the Panthers reopened, but without success. In the summer of 1977, unable to stomach exile any longer, Huey suddenly returned from Cuba. He was given a welcome by the local left, culminating in a ceremony and citizenship award presented by Democratic Assemblyman Tom Bates, husband of Berkeley's radical mayor, Lonnie Hancock. Not everyone was ready to return a blind eye to the Panther reality. The minute Huey stepped off the plane, Alameda County prosecutors began preparing to try him for the murder of Kathleen Smith, the 17-year-old prostitute he had killed 3 years earlier. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead. It's an extra long chapter, and so I'm going to go ahead and leave it there for the time being, and we'll pick up where we left off next week. But until then, thank you very much for joining me, and have a great day.